You kind of made it clear in the email, but I'm not sure what brings you to me.
Well, yeah. So I came across the um, PDF for Sorcerer, and I was intrigued because you take a very different approach than most role playing games, and you say all this in your commentary. And I hadn't really encountered something like that. But I was doubly intrigued because I don't know. It seems to me, and I've seen this in. I watched some of your consulting videos.
Okay.
Is you go about role playing games in a way of um, prompting people to, or depending on the game, it's like some games are just games. Um, but this one particularly, and some others I've seen, prompting people to seriously engage with and ask meaningful questions. Um, and I was particularly interested by Sorcerer. I'm interested in these questions. I regard them as real questions, and I saw Sorcerer as a. I was just like, holy shit! There's other people out there asking these in a very interesting way, in a way that's different from just kind of going through theory, but actually kind of putting yourself in it and empathizing with it.
Okay. Well, as I mentioned, there's several different angles of attack, and
Absolutely.
probably the one that can't be primary, but we have to admit that it comes in is that, it's I was thinking today it was like an Onion headline. Aging man opines about the universe. It's
Yeah.
like I guess we're going to be lining up
Well,
for that one, right? Um,
and there's ultimately no way you can't, to an extent,
right,
take a stance in that, even in
exactly,
how you set up the game's mechanics.
right. I agree about that. So, I guess I'm kind of saying that letting that come in as necessary while we talk about the other things is just something that I'm going to have to live with. Um,
Yeah, I'm happy to do that.
okay, excellent. And then hopefully keeping any autobiography in that regard down to a useful, down into just staying in utility for it. Okay,
Yeah.
so I think the first issue is whether role playing itself is a medium that we can just say is an artistic medium. And like any other artistic medium, doesn't necessarily mean that poking it makes art, right?
Mm,
You can take any artistic medium and you can just do whatever with it. That's fine. But
sure.
it is available for that purpose. Um, and by purpose, I'm just going to have really like small A art. I mean, really,
Yeah.
really small, like trivially small A art, which in this case probably just can't be could easily be summarized as making shit up. So,
Yeah.
I'm not claiming any more grandeur than that. So, if it is available, I mean, if role playing is this medium that's available for this, and the alternative seems to be that it is effectively pop culture gear for other media,
Mm,
that or it is in fact a just sort of a product stream. You want to be a gamer, so you buy from this product stream, and you want to be in this particular subculture, and I guess that's what we do in this subculture, so I'll get good at that thing that you get good at for doing it.
sure.
And ultimately, all those are understandable human activities, but none of them really involve putting any priority or attention into this medium at all.
Sure.
So if we say, okay, we're going to put some priority and attention into this medium. I can tell you that as far back as 1981, I was convinced for the first time that the medium was not worth the effort. that it seemed like it would be, and then failed. And that anything I tried to contact with, or anything that I tried to implement, things in it that I found uh, engaging enough that I wanted to do that with it, finding people to do it with seemed insurmountable, and the whole thing just didn't seem like it was working. Um, so I went through, I would say, a couple of cycles of this, of coming to a conclusion that you can do certain things with it, but only so much, and that at least socially speaking, there wasn't going to be a whole lot you could do with it, even if you tried, due to the nature of the subculture it was in, and that no one else wanted to do it.
Because you felt the nature of the subculture was dependent on trope, or
Well,
couldn't
at the
be
time,
exploratory.
each of these is also embedded in a particular and exact time period. 1981
Mm,
has qualities as such. 1991 has qualities as such. And the to go into exactly what the details were in each case would be kind of laborious. In the
sure.
first one, I would say mostly overall that what I wasn't finding was um, a desire for surprise, and I wasn't finding a desire for expression of things that yourself you might not agree with, but that you wanted in a fiction, and
Mm,
not know where the fiction was going to go. That this
mm,
was a creative act, not an act of receiving. That was, I think, probably a related point that you've probably picked up from the Sorcerer text, is that I'm talking about this particular medium in terms of the doing of it rather than the reception of it from some other creator,
mm.
which is fine. I mean, I have read a book or two in my day. I have seen a movie or two in my day. I am fine with artistic media as that person makes it, and then through a variety of means, I am holding a thing and I do it. I experience it.
Yeah,
I
but
get that. But here we're talking
like
about.
you said,
Mhm.
that's not actual role
Right.
playing properly. That's
It is certainly
um,
not what you. How am I going to put it? If someone wants to say they are role playing in hobby terms and that's what they're selling or that's what they're buying, there's nothing I can do to make them stop. But I do think it is simply a fundamentally different act to say this is a weirder activity in which what you're doing as you make it and how you're experiencing it as an art, as in artistic reception terms, is pretty unusual. It's got a lot more in common with playing music than it does with telling stories,
mm,
as far
mm,
as the actual medium is concerned. And so that really interested me. I mean, and the fact that a number of us could experience it sporadically, a number of us could experience it um, very joyfully, and that surprise was there, and the surprise also was about the content, but could also be about, did that just happen? did we
yeah,
did we do that?
yeah.
I mean, there. And so through the course of coming back into role playing and having more success sporadically enough to say, maybe it's not impossible, but damned if I can see how you can actually facilitate this, right, in some way. We've got the social angle, we've got the topic angle, the actual subject matter, and we've got this business about the operation of the medium. And you know everyone seems to think it's one of the others that went wrong. So what's going on here? So that at
Mm,
least put me into a questioning phase. And Sorcerer's roots actually go all the way back to the early 90s, when I said, this is it. Either I find a way to actually do what I've just been talking about, or I'm done. I'm done. I've got, maybe I should just write fiction. I know all these comic book people, and I'm getting deep in that world. I can get going in that if I want to. I've got the contacts for it. Um, Maybe I should be focusing on um, other means of expression. And so this is it. I'm going to jump into this and work on it. So that's pretty much the first question is, are we working with a medium that has these properties? And so Sorcerer actually has its roots in the decision to find out. And therefore,
Mm,
perhaps there's a um, certain visceral focus to its content about that,
absolutely.
right? Because of the fact that it was, as it turned out, of several projects, it was the one that had the driving power to do this. Now, that kind of goes to the question of the fictional content, because for purposes of this project, which I hope I'm making clear is not a particularly, I mean, I wasn't getting a degree for this. I was getting a degree for the study of the evolution of genitals in mammals. Okay, I mean, that's what I was working on in science. And I was traveling around the country and the world giving talks. I'm writing papers and I'm teaching classes and I'm becoming a zoologist. So the point is I wasn't doing this I wasn't getting a degree for this. I wasn't in a discourse community that was interested in what I might say.
Mm,
And that's actually kind of important in retrospect. The oldest discourse community in role playing is actually a zine called Alarms and Excursions. And it has been a thought leader since basically, since the moment the activity was even recognized as such. And a lot of the people who who people my age who are now kind of these various intense and well-known game designers um, made their bones as zine writers in Alarms and Excursions, and there are several others. One of the spin-offs, or maybe sort of a breakaway node, was a group of people at a Midwestern university who started their own little group called Interactive Fiction. There was another set that when the internet became a thing and people were interacting on Usenet and things like that, then there was something called the RFGA. And let's not forget some of the magazines, which, although generally were branding and community building in the bad sense of community, they were, on the other hand, inadvertently good things would occur in a lot of the articles and places like Dragon or Dungeon anyway. So, I mean, there's no question. So there's been discourse all the way along, but I had never been to a role playing convention. I had never looked at a role playing trade magazine. I had no idea what, the hot new game was or anything like that. So I was really outside of that whole thing. What I'm trying to say is that this was not built in an intellectual atmosphere of debate. This was
sure.
raw play at the table.
Mm,
So what you're seeing in Sorcerer is the process that I have often joked was a little bit like binding a demon, because it basically, you know, did things and I would be forced to say, what the hell did that just do? Or
mm,
if it did that, then what about all these things I've been working on? Are they even relevant? It's there were also two angles of attack. There was the topical angle of attack, which actually began with sword and sorcery fantasy. This brings us to the topic issue itself, that I have a long history with fantasy, and I have uh, a very grievous and disturbed and unhappy relationship with the development of fantasy from an idiom into a genre. When basically, as soon as you saw fantasy on the shelf of the bookstore, which happened during my lifetime, there was a huge change. One of my classes through Adepts Play is actually called Three Fantasies, specifically about fantasy role playing in the context of the larger history of fantasy as a topic. So I won't go into all the details here, but let's just say that at the time, in the 90s, nobody really knew who Robert E. Howard was. I know it's different now, but back then, the smooth blend of Conan-ness was absolute.
And you see progressing from that as a bad thing.
Progressing away from
or
that,
the things that came, yeah,
progressing away from
the
that
things
is
that
something
came.
was something I wanted to do. Part of it was recovery, but it's not just bibliophilic recovery. It's more like saying those people, men and women, there's a plethora of both, were just people. And we are just people. There's nothing stopping us from doing our own fantasy.